somebody else telling people to turn their phones off. I just got through 2.5 weeks of saying it. The last time I was in this theater was last year to see How Green Was My Valley with my son, and Marino O'Hara was introducing it, which was a very moving event. So it's really meaningful for me to have this film shown here. When Charles Cohen, who's one of the co-producers of this film, called me and asked me if I was interested in doing this, to say that I was immediately is to put it mildly. I just kind of jumped at it, and it's a book that had meant a lot to me when I was young, as it did to almost everyone who appears in the film. I decided that on reflection, what I wanted to do was to make a film about filmmaking, because that's what the book is. It's a discussion between two filmmakers about filmmaking. And the producers were behind me on that, and I really need to thank them. It's a co-production, an international co-production. So the French side is Artline Films, that's Olivier Neal and his team, and here on the American side is Cohen Media, and one of the producers of this film, Daniel Batzik, is here with us tonight, so I really want you to give them a round of applause. I really am not going to say any more except to say that it's been a joy to work on this film, because I've lived with Alfred Hitchcock's films most of my life. That really was my door into cinema in the first place when I was very, very young. I watched them all the time, over and over, and every time it's a new experience and a new revelation. So I really want to thank you all for coming, and we'll be back with Mark Olsen after the film for a conversation. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Olsen. I'm a writer with the Los Angeles Times. Thank you. I write a regular series of features on independent documentary and foreign language films called Indie Focus. You can follow it on Twitter at Indie Focus, and we also have our new weekly newsletter. You can sign up for it at LATimes.com/Indie Focus. But you did not come here for blatant self-promotion. You came here for Kirk Jones, director.
And now I'll start with my blatant self-promotion. Yeah.
Now, opening December 4th in Los Angeles,
right,
at the New York.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, there's a round of applause. Yeah.
And I'll start by just asking you, I think when you think about turning a book into a movie, it usually is like a sort of like an airport thriller, or now a major motion picture. And I'm interested in, for you, like what was the movie that you saw in that book?
Well, when the tapes are 27 hours, right? So when I was listening to them, and I listened to them transcribe most of them myself, so that I could just kind of like get the feel of what they were saying and everything. There are about 1,000 different movies that you could make. But because of who I am, just different, my own predilections and my own this venture to put it prurient interests, noble interests. I wanted to make a film about filmmaking, and I also wanted to make a movie. Meaning, there's a lot more that they say, but I wanted to make something that had an energy and attention and a movement, but that covered a lot of ground, and that had where there was an emotional spark. And so I was listening for where the energy was between them, and then for where the energy was in the interviews with the people.
And was that difficult to find? I mean, there's a version of this movie that's like My Dinner with Andre. It's just like two guys talking.
You mean, there is a short film, there's the filmmaker Robert Fisher, who did a film called Mr. Hitchcock and Mr. Truffaut, where yes, he did something different. And that could certainly be done, but I felt like the spirit of the enterprise, there was somebody, I was talking to somebody recently who was saying that they thought of the movie as something more like an adaptation of the book. And I was like, yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, I wouldn't put it that way, but it's interesting to hear somebody else say that, because it's a conversation between these people about filmmaking. They're filmmakers. They're cross-generational. They're very, passionate about it. They've got a, Truffaut is on a mission. Hitchcock is, responding to that. There are differences between them and similarities between them, and then I wanted to extend it, into now.
And I'm really interested in where they kind of both were at the time they had this conversation. The idea that Truffaut was sort of a young filmmaker, kind of on the rise, that Hitchcock only had a few films left to make, and like how important do you think where they kind of each were in their trajectories, how important was that to the conversation that they had?
I think it's really important because, Hitchcock had just made The Birds. He was in post-production of The Birds. He only made, after that there was Marnie, Torn Curtain, Topaz, Friends, and Family Plot. That was it. And I love all those movies, but even Topaz, I think a number of clips from it in the film actually, but I think that, for a lot of people it's not his best work. It's certainly out of time in terms of the moment in which it was made, although perhaps a little bit more, he dealt with that rupture a little bit more successfully than other filmmakers from his generation. But then Truffaut is, he had the 400 Blows, which was this massive success, but then he had Shoot the Piano Player, which was an enormous, failure at first, in France. And then he had Jules and Jim, which was a massive success. So he was like this, international superstar. And for him to just kind of like call up Alfred Hitchcock and say, I want to, write a book about, and do an interview with you that covers every film you've ever made so that I can convince people what I know that you're the greatest filmmaker alive. I mean, you can imagine. And he really did put as much energy into the book. It's like Olivia says, it's not Truffaut doing a book about Hitchcock, it's something else.
Because I keep asking myself what like the contemporary analog would be to this dynamic. Like, recently an issue of Film Comment had the young filmmaker Alex Ross Perry talking to Noah Baumbach.
Slightly older filmmaker, Noah Baumbach.
It's like, but I think if it was more like someone like, say, Alex Ross Perry talking to, say, Ridley Scott, like someone that was, the power differential would be much different between them. And is that some sense of what it was like between Truffaut and Hitchcock? Because it's interesting that you said Truffaut was sort of coming into his powers. He had a certain amount of stardom, but he still was kind of a relatively young filmmaker.
Yeah, this was, maybe there have been conversations between filmmakers that predate this, but this was the first one that was really like, an eye-opening experience for people on a wide scale. And it's different from a critic talking to a filmmaker. Peter had done a great interview with Hitchcock, an extensive one with him before Truffaut did, but Peter wasn't a filmmaker yet. So it's a different kind of relationship, it's a different kind of validation. There have been many since then. Cameron Crowe did his book with Billy Wilder, Soderbergh did his thing with Richard Lester, Olivier actually did a beautiful book of interviews with Ingmar Bergman. I think that though those are different because those are people whose reputations are cemented. This was about the act of cementing a reputation. So in fact, the film that Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow made about Brian De Palma is something more like that, because that's somebody who's in an odd way in need of being reclaimed by younger filmmakers.
And now, do you feel that Hitchcock was in some way waiting for this? Like, did he the way in which he seems he seems hungry to be taken seriously. He seems very engaged in the conversation with Truffaut. And do you feel like he had been waiting for someone to ask him these questions?
No, I think he was shocked. No, genuinely. He had had a lot of extravagant things written about him at Cahiers du Cinéma in particular. Godard's piece about The Wrong Man is absolutely magnificent, but it's different. It's something else. It's more of an elevation, and it's viewing him, putting him in a slightly more abstract plane from a different perspective, written by somebody before they were a filmmaker. Truffaut also wanted to kind of like say, well, there's a nuts and bolts to movie making too, and that's something that's not present in, Romero's and Chevreul's book, and some of the writing on him. And so, he had a very different perspective in that way, but I don't think that he really expected that, to tell you the truth.
And then I'm also interested in what you think of the way that Truffaut approached the conversation. As you said, it's the way that he kind of goes between being a critic and being a filmmaker. And to my mind, he actually more acts as a critic than a filmmaker a lot of times because of the way that the section in the book where I think it's about The Wrong Man, where he's trying to tell Hitchcock that Hitchcock was the wrong guy to direct that movie, and has this whole sort of like set of reasons why.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is, by the way, a very, very marked difference between the book and the tapes. You can hear it, it's very present in the movie, which is that Hitchcock is very animated and spontaneous and funny. He does not appear to be that way in the book. There's a reason for that. I think that the book was worked on in French by someone who really did not speak English at that point, and then retranslated back into English, so it kind of lost a layer of spontaneity. It's not to take anything away from it. It's a magnificent book, but he was constructing it like a film. I think, I don't know if he's thinking I guess he's thinking as a critic. Yeah, well, he had that, yes, there's the anti-documentary thing. Yeah. He's just like, goes on in the tapes, and he's just hammering away at that. And the interesting thing is that Hitchcock doesn't ever argue. He really doesn't argue. That's a hard thing to get into the movie because it would involve an enormous length. But he just kind of shies away. I think he thought of it as kind of unseemly. He's also very stinting with praise for other filmmakers. He doesn't really do that. Truffaut brings up some people. He's like, yes, I enjoyed that one, but and then he goes on to something else. I know that there were some filmmakers that he really loved Blow Up. He really loved, I think, Masculine and Feminine. He really loved, according to Patrick McGilligan in his book, he really loved Blow and Billy Wilder, I think, in The Apartment. But yeah.
But now, were you surprised when you were listening to the tapes to get that difference in tone, and to because you knew the book very well, you've been living with it for many years, and sort of suddenly have this whole other color come out of those conversations? Were you really surprised when you were first listening to those tapes?
And what, in a way, but I understood immediately what the situation was. It's like there's already the immediate language barrier, not for Hitchcock, but he kind of spoke French. He's speaking French actually, a word here and there in the movie. He doesn't say necrophilia, he says necrophilie. He's trying to slip in a French word here and there, but he understands what Truffaut is saying by and large. But Truffaut really did not know English at that point, and Helen Scott did an incredible job. She does make a lot of mistakes, as people have pointed out. You'd make a lot of mistakes too if you had to sit there for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, just kind of like translating every word. But one thing that did surprise me is that there's a long discussion in the book about the murder scene in Sabotage, and it's just not there in the tapes anywhere.
And now, were you surprised the first time you heard Hitchcock tell them to turn the machine off? Because that's something that's really not represented in the book, and so I think that would be a huge surprise to come to the tapes.
No. I wasn't surprised. It's Hitchcock, but I thought it was very funny. It's funny when he says to turn the machine off. Would you consider yourself a Catholic filmmaker? Shut the machine off. And I find it very touching when he, because I think there's a common perception that more modern filmmakers talk more. are more open about their work. And the filmmakers of Hitchcock's generation, John Ford, Peter's movie about John Ford, is just sitting there. Hawks, to a certain extent, it's like they found ways of not talking about certain things. But I think if you listen closely to anybody, like Marty, who's a big talker, obviously, or David, who's or James, they also don't. There's a limit. They talk about certain things, but they don't talk the movies. In other words, it's sort of like I made the movie. I'm not going to talk it.
But do you feel like 27 hours over 6 days? Like, is there an extent to which you think Truffaut just worn down? Like, in listening to the tapes, is day 3 like different from day 1, and like what's he like on the last day?
No, they're all pretty well rested. No, not really. There's a lot of lunch. Really. As a matter of fact, the section on the wrong, the man who knew too much, the first man who knew too much, the audio is a little bit rough because you can hear the clinking of knives and forks and du thé, du sucre. I don't know. I don't think that there's a fatigue factor in there.
But now, in what you were saying, I'm wondering about Hitchcock's kind of persona and the way that people thought they knew him, especially in regards to his TV work. And did that kind of do him a disservice? Like, do you think part of the way in which he needed to be reclaimed and for someone like Truffaut to come along to get him to talk about his own work in a serious way was that Hitchcock's persona was somewhat, I don't want to say anti-art, but that there was, he didn't do himself any favors as an artist because it threw his public persona.
Yeah, but that's true of everybody in that generation. I mean, you couldn't. I think that they felt like if they did that, that would be career suicide. I mean, that's John Ford saying, I make westerns, and that's Howard Hawks saying, I'm just trying to tell a story, and just like these were brilliant people. I mean, it's the proof is up there on the screen. But if they had spent a lot of time talking about their art and how stupid David O. Selznick or Daryl Zanuck was publicly, it wouldn't have gotten them very far. I think that they and in Hitchcock's case, also he constructed this kind of blasé thing. He also, the actors are cattle thing, while it's very funny when he says, I think that that's bullshit. I mean, I think you can't get that kind of intensity that you get with Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman and Notorious with James Stewart and Vertigo, and just say, I just draw the storyboards and then I go on the set and I take care of itself. It's a smokescreen. It's a way of pretending, my mastery is sort of offhand. So the trade-off, of course, is that, people are going to think, well, he doesn't care. He just makes pictures, But then the benefit is it allows people to leave him, people leave him alone.
Well, in the book, he tries to explain actors are cattle in a bigger way, but even there it comes out kind of...
He says that it's a joke. I mean, he says that he can... But I mean, the thing that I did want to deal with, which in the movie is something that's... It's an enormous shift in movies, that happened in the 50s. Enormous. And it's like Marty says, he's quite correct, the center of gravity shifted. And you can't direct actors now. No one really does that. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's not for any of us to say. It's just a change that happened. David has discussed this, and he has his own, but what he says is quite real. It's like the iron umbrella thing that he's talking about. There's no way that a movie like Raging Bull could have been made, or There Will Be Blood, or Master, or, for that matter, Zodiac, even though that seems like a much more circumscribed kind of movie, there's no way that those films could have been made in the same spirit, De Palma works in that way, but that's a little bit different. That's something else. And even there's still more of an exploration of the actors, I think.
And now, in the sort of a group of filmmakers that you turn to talk to in the movie, one of the things I thought was so interesting is how it is as if each of them has their own version of Hitchcock. Like,
Yeah.
it's I think you do a great job. It's like you get some sense of like what a sort of filmmaker influence
Yes.
kind of looks like. I think that when David Fincher uses the term applied science, it's easy to think about that in relation to his own work, and then
Yes.
Wes Anderson is talking about the kind of graphic
Yes.
qualities of the screen.
That's true.
It's the exact same thing. You easily can think about like, oh, that's what he's drawing from
Yeah.
Hitchcock. How surprised were you to like hear them be able to articulate that influence as well as they did?
I wasn't surprised by Marty, because he and I been talking nonstop for 20-something years, I don't know, about a lot of things. I wasn't surprised by Arnaud, because he and I spent a lot of years talking about Hitchcock. In fact, when we were writing Jimmy P, there was a scene where he called it Dial-In for Murder scene. I mean, it's just like Hitchcock is on his mind a lot. Fincher was different because when I asked him, I fully expected him to say no. I never heard him talk about Hitchcock. I've only heard him talk about more recent films from the 70s, generally where he lives, and sometimes John Huston. He was talking about Bob Fosse. But when I asked him, if he'd ever read the book, and he said, "Oh yeah, like hundreds of times," it's just like, wow, and he was really into it, obviously.
Well, I think the moment when he's talking about, in relation to Vertigo, how a movie has a longer life than its opening weekend, the first few months of its life. It certainly isn't hard to imagine that he's not so secretly talking about Zodiac and like how people may or may not that movie's kind of really come around in a lot of ways. And so again, it's interesting to me to think about what filmmakers take from other filmmakers, like the lessons they learn from looking at Vertigo and thinking about the way the response to that movie is turned around.
Well, that's one of the great, that's a fascinating story of film culture, because I do remember that moment. It was a long time, when Vertigo was just not available. And I remember a secret screening of that in Rear Window. There were the 5 movies that were not available. Once at NYU, it was just this, Peter Wollman taught a class in Hitchcock at NYU, which I did not take, but I audited a little bit of it. And he did this screening with me, and it was just an overwhelming experience. Yeah, I don't know. It's what he says. I find very. It's true. Zodiac was just kind of dumped. There's no other way of describing it. I mean, just kind of at the wrong time of the year. And I remember people saying, you really should see this one.
And tell me a little bit more about the kind of the Vertigo sequence in the movie, in that the way that it is in the film, what Hitchcock is saying goes so perfectly to the visuals. In my mind, he's like it's like the film is playing in his head as he's talking about it. And I guess I have to maybe go behind the curtain a little bit and ask if you either cheated on the audio or were cheating on cutting the images that we see to sort of make them go together as well as they do, or do they really just went together that well?
But that's the work, I mean that's the whole point. That's the movie making part, it's a movie with a lot of elements that you see in other movies. There are a lot of movies that have talking heads, interviews with people, film clips, letters, photographs, all that. The point is, how do you work with them? How do you make it work? For me, I wanted the things to be bound. I wanted that to be the movie. So I don't want to do a lot of fancy graphic stuff. The whole point is to keep things, it's about the bouncing back and forth of the ideas and stuff. So, no, there wasn't a lot of manipulation of the, yes, there's cutting out a little breath here and there and stuff like that. But yeah, there was a lot of work in adjusting the rhythm so that it's absolutely right. But sometimes that does work really well. Other times it doesn't. Sometimes the description just kind of like goes on much longer, and you want to use every word, but you kind of can't because the tension isn't, sustained.
That sequence when he's talking about vertigo is also one of the most kind of fascinating differences from the book to the actual to hear the actual tapes.
Well, you know, I firmly agree with what Fincher says. If you think that you can hide as a director, you're nuts. And the movies that are made by directors who do think that they can hide and just kind of take it easy are not good movies. You know, there's no two ways about it. That's absolutely right. It's just that people tend to pound on Hitchcock because of the nature of the things that he was kind of drawn to. But I mean, you know, I don't think that there's anything. You know, why does Hitchcock deserve people's scorn more than, I don't know, you know, John Huston or something? I mean, it's just like, you know, Billy Wilder. It's just like everybody who's an artist worth paying attention to is going into areas that are uncomfortable.
And I'm interested to know, in the same way that, you know, Truffaut spoke to Hitchcock to sort of like revive Hitchcock's reputation. For you in making this movie now, I'm wondering how you see this in relation to sort of the idea of like what classic cinema is, and if, you know, both Hitchcock and Truffaut, and maybe even the idea of like a sort of like a classic canon or lineage of cinema, like is this, where do you see this, your documentary sort of in relation to that?
I don't know. You know, I mean, it's like I think after the fact, I guess I could say there are a lot of films that are being made about cinema, right? You know, Noah and Jake's movie about Brian is a perfect example. We showed, you know, in the New York Film Festival, there was Walter Salaz's movie about Jajanka. I think, you know, it's not that uncommon, I'm sorry to say, to go to the movies now and see a movie and come away with the impression that it might have been made by somebody who had never seen a movie before. It's just true, you know. They probably have, but they might not have, you know. And it's also the case that a lot of people, many of the people in this movie, you know, who are making movies within a certain range are finding it more and more difficult. Movies that are of ambition, that are, let's say, you know, between $15 million and $50 million or something like that. It's getting tougher and tougher. I think everybody would agree about that. So those two things together are certainly, you know, bubbling up. They're factors that are just present. You can see it, you know, everywhere. So what does it mean for the future of cinema? I really don't know. I have my guesses, but yes, in that sense, I suppose that's why I moved to make a film like this.
Well, because to me, I think about how, you know, our definition of what classic cinema is sort of constantly expanding. So because we're, you know, moving forward in time.
Yeah.
And so I think, as one often does about the movie Tootsie, and now, you know, Tootsie, you still think of it as like a more contemporary film, but at this point, you know, it's 30 years old, and when that movie came out, a movie from the 50s would have been the same sort of distance from it.
Right.
And so, like, in thinking about how we are redefining classic cinema, or like what the idea of it is, and I'm wondering if, you know, when you all are showing movies at the Film Society, do you find that, are younger people coming? Is there some sort of drop off where like people won't watch a movie, you know, before a certain year? Like where do you think we're sort of at in our relationship?
Well, there's the cinephile audience, which is great. People who are devoted to, you know, who are fetishistic about film history, actually, and seeing films in 35. You know, that's a thing, because it's rarer and rarer. I think that it's surprising to me when I think back about a moment in the 90s when it seemed as if there was a consciousness about film preservation, there was a consciousness about film history, and there was this kind of like sense of, mission accomplished. Well, that's just never the case, of course. And then you realize, well, all those things have to be maintained and, re-emphasized. And the sense of like what cinema is, how it's taught, how it's talked about, is still kind of treated like a plaything. It's like a toy that's kind of tossed around, and sort of, I remember the horror that I felt when there was an article in the New York Times. I actually wrote a piece about it in Falcano, about aspirational viewing in cinema, and, the guy who, I'm freeing myself from, the responsibility of having to go see movies by people like the Dardenne brothers that are too taxing on me. It's like, they're printing this in the New York Times? I mean, really? In the magazine section? That's a point of view? No one would dare, saying that. I mean, you do read things like that. There's, a piece in the New Yorker blog about what a jerk Thoreau was. I don't know. I mean, it's just like these things do occur kind of regularly. But I think that I guess that what it really amounts to is that as years go by, the preciousness of what one would call high Hollywood, and throughout the rest of the world too, the approach to cinema, the best of it, seems more and more precious as the years go by. I do think that good movies, or sort of like ordinary movies from, say, 1947, are a lot better than good movies and ordinary movies now. You know what I mean? I mean, in general, that's the general, and that's the problem. Great movies now are, great movies in any era, it's a different story, but it's just the level of the ordinary stuff is very different.
Now, between your work as a writer and a critic, as a programmer, and as a filmmaker, how do those three things sort of intertwine for you? And is like the overall project kind of the same? Like, do they all come from sort of the same place of sort of cinema love?
I don't know. I mean, they come from the same place, but it's cinema love is a term that I'm not that comfortable with, I have to be honest. I mean, yes, of course, we can all agree we're all here because we love cinema, there's no question about that, but then when it's said like that, it kind of comes out sort of sounding like some kind of a divine affliction or something like that, I don't believe in that idea. I'm not ashamed in any way of, the fact that I love cinema, and that I've spent a lot of my life watching movies. It's the kind of thing, it's the sort of thing that Marty's talking about, is like bullying as usual, it's sort of like, there's always that idea, like, well, that one's okay, I guess, if you love movies, fuck you, but I think it's all the same place, but they're very different activities. I mean, writing is it's a whole other world for me. It's a very intense activity. Filmmaking is an intense activity of very, very different sort, with a very different kind of attention. And I have to say that this is the third movie that I've made with Rachel Reichman, who's the cutter and co-producer, and she's just like one of the best creative collaborators anyone could have, and we just work really closely. And then, programming is something very different. That's an entirely different kind of enterprise and a different kind of attention.
But then just the last thing I'll ask you is just could you have written an article or an essay and said the same things that you say here? Or I guess I'm wondering what is sort of specific to making this as a film for you to get these ideas about Hitchcock and Truffaut and cinema out there?
Well, it's not a matter of getting ideas out there, it's about giving people an experience, I think. So, I don't want to, yes, it carries a certain amount of history and, lays things out in order to set up that experience. But it's the experience of the intensity of engagement with the film image. You know what I mean? So it's like there's no way of, I mean, sure you can write about that, but I wasn't writing about it. I was making a movie. I don't know. They're very different enterprises, and I feel like, you know, the thing that Marty talks about, you know, the thing that Eisenstein talked about, you know, the third image that you see in your mind's eye when the two images go together. I mean, it's like it's quite real. And, you know, sitting there in the cutting room and just going, sometimes getting down to a matter of frames, adjusting things frame by frame, getting the sound just right, and going into the mix and getting every single, you know, pop and echo just right. I don't know, that's a different enterprise. It's a different, something different.
And that's where we're going to wrap it up. There are movies to be seen. Please, everyone, join me now in thanking our guest.